Hi, I'm Debbie and welcome to Book and Bujo, where I talk about all things books, bullet journals, and stationery. Today we are going through all of my August Readathons to find out if I completed them or if I failed miserably. So we're going to start out with the final book support group, and that is put together by Steph at Steph Loves. And this is the 8th round of the final book support group. It ran from August 7th to August 13th. Now, I did realize with this readathon that I do not do so great with just like week-long readathons. I did not plan my books accordingly. So usually I take my TBR and I have what books I'm going to read, and from there I kind of mood read within those books. And that doesn't always work well for week-long readathons because I don't always get to the books that I'm supposed to be reading for those, and most of the time I forget that it's not the full month. So yeah, I did okay. I accomplished my main goal, but I didn't necessarily accomplish the readathon, if that makes any sense. Let's just get into it. So there was 7 prompts that you can choose from. You don't necessarily need to do all 7 of them, so that was fine. I ended up doing 3 of these ones and then realized that I actually did a 4th one. So that was nice. As I was looking through like the dates, I actually read some of them. I just hadn't put it to a prompt, but I was able to put it to a prompt this time, so that was great. I was able to put it to a prompt as I was looking back on the books I read and what prompts they fit. So the first prompt was to finish a final book. And I did. I completed Gods and Monsters by Shelby Mahurin, and that's the 3rd book in the Serpent and Dove series. And I'm glad I continued with the series because I actually did really enjoy this book. I think the first book I gave like 4.5, maybe 5 stars. I'd probably give it 4.5 stars if I read it now. Back then I was a little more lenient with my ratings. I'm getting a little more stingy with them now, but so I think the first book, Serpent and Dove, I gave, it was either 4.5 or 5 stars. The second book I gave a very low 3-star because I just didn't like the direction it went, and it was more miss than hit for me. But this one took the direction of where that one went and actually did something good with it. So I appreciated that and I really liked that. So definitely high 4-star for me for Gods and Monsters. So I'm glad I continued with the series. So if you're someone who after the second book was like, yeah, no, not finishing, it might be worth picking it up and giving it a try because it actually was really good. And that completed a series for me. It crossed off one of the top 10 series that I want to read in 2023. It just actually completed a series, which is what the whole goal of a final book support group is. And so that was great. And it sounds like a storm is coming through. I'm not it's coming close. I don't know if you can hear the thunder or not, but it always makes me so excited. That's one of my favorite sounds in the world, is hearing thunder. It just makes me so happy, brings me joy. Okay, next book. So the next one was to continue a series I was unsure about, and I was going to read Restless Slumber by KJ Sutton. Well, I did read that, just not during the readathon for this. So then I had to do a spinner wheel, and it landed on Buffy the Vampire Slayer Willow by Marika Tamaki, and I did read that, and that actually was really good as well. I enjoyed that. And if you want to see the spinner wheel and how it landed and all of that, I will leave up in the cards my August all the readathons up there, so you can give it a watch if you want. Then to read a veteran or a sequel for that, or read a veteran sequel, and for that I wanted to read Daughter of Witches by Patricia C. Weird, and it's the 2nd book in the Lyra novels, and I did read that, but again not during the readathon. But I did have a backup for that one, and that was to read Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, and I did actually read that, and I read it during the readathon time. I just forgot to submit it and mark it off because yeah, there we go. What are you gonna do? And then the next prompt was read your longest series, and to me, I was taking it, you could take it a couple of different ways. One, maybe a series that you've been reading the longest, like it's been hanging out there just waiting to be read, or it's a very long series. And that's how I took it, because because this series has over 40 books in it. And that is the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett, and I read Men-at-Arms, which is the 15th book, and I actually also read Soul Music, but again, not during this readathon time period. And that was, Soul Music is the 16th book. Both very good, very enjoyable, had a lot of fun with those. The next prompt was to borrow a book, and for that I was going to read one of my library books, and it was going to be Middle Game by Shauna McGuire, which I did read, but again, not during the week of the readathon. So same with most anticipated. I had a couple of them on there that I was going to read, which I did end up reading during the month, just not during that week. And why I put Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson on there, I don't know, because that's very long. I don't know if I would have gotten through that and any of the other books. I probably would have just gotten through that one, but again, read it, but not during that readathon. So I got through, we'll say 4 books. Gods and Monsters, Willow, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, and Men-at-Arms. So a fairly successful, but not quite as successful as I was hoping, but that's okay. On to the Full Moon Readathon with Jan Agaton. And that readathon ran from August 1st to August 13th, so that one was a little better. And there was 4 different character prompts, so you could read 3 different prompts for skeleton, vampire, pumpkin, or devil. So as the overachiever I am, I always try and get all 4. I actually only got 2 of them, but I did get through 1 prompt from each of the other 2. So I did wear a favorite graphic tee, and that's for the skeleton prompt. And I also read a book with my favorite supernatural character, which is Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I read Angel and Spike Volume 2, and that was for the vampire character. So the 2 that I actually did complete, the first one was Pumpkin, and for that you had to read a nostalgic spooky book, and for that I read Buffy the Vampire Slayer Willow by Marika Tamaki, and you had to read someone else's pick. And for that, I read Men-at-Arms by Terry Pratchett, which is the 15th book in the Discworld series. And that was actually chosen by one of the participants in one of the other readathons that I participated in. And then had to have something pumpkin flavored. And since I am allergic to pumpkin, I had my husband eat a pumpkin spice RX bar, which he thoroughly enjoyed. And that fulfilled all 3 prompts for pumpkin. So next was Devil. And for that, the first prompt is fire involved, so fire, burn, or something like that. And I read Clara and the Sun by Kazuya Ishiguro, and that has sun in the title. And there's a nice bright yellow sun on the cover, and so that is, and of course, the sun is all fiery. So there we go. And I thoroughly enjoyed that book. It was so good. It's very heartwarming. It's interesting, and I can see why everybody loved that book. Okay, next prompt was a morally gray character. There's quite a few books I could have read for this one, but for this one I did read Dust of Dreams, and that is the 9th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Stephen Erickson. Very long book, but very good. The last prompt is read past your bedtime, and I actually did that on a few occasions. It wasn't, one day it was like 10 minutes past, another day it was half an hour past. So I didn't stay up till crazy hours in the morning, but I did on multiple days read past my bedtime. So that one was a win. I did finish that readathon. Yay! Next up is the Camp Counselor Readathon with Books and Bops, and I was on Team Drew. The prompts on this were so much fun. I would actually like to try and do this one again just on my own with the different prompts because they're so much fun. So I may add some of these prompts to my TBRopoly game in the odd and even card piles and include these in my next TBR game. Sadly, I did not get as many points as I was hoping for my team, but it happens. So I did complete a few prompts, and the first one was a book that takes place during summer, and for that I read Across the Desert by Dusty Bowling, and that was 5 points for that one, and I love that book. I highly recommend that book, especially to middle graders, even young YA. I think it would be a great book for parents to read with their kids. It hits some really tough issues, so there are some trigger warnings in that book, so you'll want to make sure you take a look at those, but so good, so inspiring. I thoroughly enjoyed that one. And you'll have to check out my August wrap-up to get a little more in-depth reviews on all of these books. So the next one was a book that takes place at a summer camp, and I did not get to that one, sadly, and that one was 10 points. But I didn't have a book on the rest of my TBR that would fit in that, and I definitely did not have the bandwidth to read even more books. So a gritty mystery, so I did read a mystery, but it was not a gritty mystery, so I did not get to that one. That one was only 3 points, so not as big of a deal. Read a true crime novel for 8 points. Again, did not get to that one. I'm actually not a huge fan of true crime novels. I enjoy them when I read them, but it's not a genre that I want to read all the time. Next prompt was a book set by a lake or body of water, and that one was 5 points, and I did read that one. I read Grey Sister by Mark Lawrence, which is the second book in the Book of the Ancestor series, and I liked that book a lot more than I liked the first one. So I enjoyed the first one. It gave it a low 4-star, but Grey Sister is 4.5. Definitely took the foundation of what was laid in Red Sister and built on that, and yes, thoroughly enjoyed that book much better. Next prompt was worth 10 points, and I am happy to say I did get this one, and it was a book recommended by a teammate, again, which was Men at Arms by Terry Pratchett, the 15th book in the Discworld series. Buddy read with a teammate for 8 points, and unfortunately I was not able to do that. And then for another 8 points, which I did get this one, book released in June, July, or August, and Angel and Spike Volume 2 by Zach Thompson was released in June of the year it was released, not this year. The book was Summer in the title. I did not get to that one. Book from your favorite genre, and that of course is fantasy. And I read The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. And then a book between 300 and 350 pages, and that's for 3 points, as was the previous one. And I read Clara and the Sun by Kaze Ishiguro. And then published during your favorite season for 5 points, and I did get this one, and that was The Last House on Earth by Robert and Ryan Marcus. And book you've been avoiding like a killer, Gods and Monsters by Shelby Mahurin, and I did read that one, and that one was 8 points. Book over 400 pages for 10 points, and I'm happy to say I did finish this one. That was Restless Slumber by KJ Sutton, which is the second book in the Fortuna Sworn series. And then a new author to you, and that was for 10 points, and that was I was going to read Court of Undying Seasons by Adrianne Strickland, and I ended up not being able to get that one. My library didn't have it in time for me to read it during the readathon, so unfortunately I did not get to that one. So Team Drew, I did fairly well. I ended up with 42 total points for Team Drew. Next readathon was Buzzwordathon, which is the year-long readathon, and for August we had to read a book with body parts. In the title, I read Men at Arms by Terry Pratchett, the 15th book in the Discworld series. I definitely got a lot of bang for my buck from Men at Arms for all of the readathons that I participated in. So thank you, Sir Terry Pratchett, for the wonderful book of Men at Arms, which is part of the Discworld series. It's also part of the City Watch sub-series. All right, so the readathon we've all been waiting for, and we wait for every year with bated breath and an excited heart, and that is the magical readathon from G at Book Roast. Oh, and Buzzwordathon is Books and Lala. So let's start out with a couple of the extras that I did. So we were able to get our dragon riding license, and I did get that, and I got that for Ariel. We had to read 2 books with dragons, and for that I read Dust of Dreams by Stephen Erickson, which is the 9th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and I read Of Dawn and Embers by Kyoko M. And then we also had to watch a movie with dragons, and I watched Avatar 2. So then Apothecary Keeper, and that's for Ariel as well. And we had to read 2 books with plants on the cover, and I read Buffy the Vampire Slayer Volume 6 by Jordi Belair, as well as Long Live the Elf Queen by J.M. Curl. Buffy had a shrubbery on the cover, and Long Live the Elf Queen had plants all over the cover. And then we also had to find, document, and take pictures of at least 5 different flowers, and I did that and shared that in the Discord. And then the other 2 extras we were able to do is Bog Cartographer, and I ended up doing that one for Karasu. And we had to read a book by the water, or a book that has a body of water on the cover, and for that I read Grey Sister by Mark Lawrence, which is the 2nd book in the Book of the Ancestors series. And then we also had to watch an animal documentary, and I watched Kangaroo Valley. And then the last one was the Sandship Engineer certification, and that's also for Karasu. So we had to read 2 books with the desert setting, and I read Across the Desert by Dusty Bowling, as well as 24 Hours in Nowhere, also by Dusty Bowling. So if you don't know, Nowhere is a town that's actually in Arizona. It's a real town. It's a small little town in Arizona. And it's a blink and you'll miss it, but it's there. Oh. The storm is coming. It's just the dust jacket. I'm still collecting my books, so I've had to take some of the dust jackets off. If you want to check out my bookshelf organization and tour, I'll leave that linked up in the cards and down below as well. Anyway, back to Sandship Engineer. So I read Across the Desert and 24 Hours in Nowhere by Dusty Bowling. Highly recommend both of them. So good. 4 and 5 star books. And then we had to do a drawing of a ship, and I was actually going to doodle one a little bit bigger and more elaborate, but just for the sake of right now, because I have this one with me, I did a quick little like trieme kind of type of ship. I don't even know if that's the name for it. That's what the word that popped in my head, has the oars and everything, and I'm just going to leave that down because it's just the wind's going to keep blowing it. Anyway, that's the extras. So there were 2 other extras that we could do. One of them we found out about later on, and I actually missed it. I didn't see it till September. And the other one we could do any time of year. So I'm saving those for September, so you'll have to check out my September wrap-up to find out what those are. All right, so we're going to start out with my first character, which is Ariel. And she has a longing to be not only a master of elements, but also a Feywild cartographer. So unfortunately, Ariel got so bogged down with classes from Master of Elements and doing her certifications that she did have to ask for an extension on a couple of classes for her Feywild cartographer. And thankfully the professors knew how hard she works and how many classes she was taking, and they said yes, that she could have a small little extension, and she was able to finish her last book on September 7th. So let's go through some of these classes. So we started with Elemental Studies, which she did have to take for both courses, and that's Element Earth in the title, and that was just an ordinary for both of those. She read Earth Spells Are Easy by Renee George, and that one is the first book in the Grimoires of a Middle-Aged Witch book, and this was adorable. I had so much fun with this book. This is just a quick, easy read, palette cleanser, super fun. I actually flew through this one, so I highly recommend that one. And the second book, what I thought was the title of the book is actually the title of the series, which is fine. It works either way. So the series is actually Wings of Earth, and it's by Eric Michael Craig, and the book itself is Echoes of Starlight. This was also a very interesting book. I thoroughly enjoyed it as well. And then to continue Elemental Studies for the Master of Elements, Ariel also had to get a Q and a D, And for the Q she read, it was for Boulder Stance, and that was a book over 500 pages, and she read Dust of Dreams. That is by Stephen Erickson, the 9th book again in the Melasma Book of the Fallen series. I definitely doubled and tripled and quadrupled up on all of my books for all the readathons I was in. So you'll hear a lot of the same books over and over. So the next class was Shapeshifting, and she needed an O for this one, and that was for the Master of Elements course. And Formation Fangs, book with vampires, and for that she read Angel and Spike Volume 2 by Zach Thompson. And then she needed to get an O in Animal Studies for both Feywild Cartography and for Master of Elements. And so she read Dawn Shard by Brandon Sanderson, as well as Zombie Cherry Chapter 1, and that is by Shoko Konami. And this one, so I understand that manga you read backwards, so from how you would read a book in the US. And I totally get that, but I didn't think about it when I was on my Kindle. So I'm like, this book makes no sense. And because I was thinking, well, on the Kindle, it'll do it the correct format, right? The first page you get would be the first page you're supposed to start reading on. No, it's not. It's formatted like an actual manga. So I had to go to the very end of the book and then work my way backwards, which was fun. And so by the time I figured that out and went the other direction, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Zombie Cherry, totally check it out. Super cute. So Animal Studies was a pet pick, so Walter picked both of those books for me. Next up was Astronomy, which Ariel needed for both courses, and that was a Moonsong ritual, word in the title of the last song you listened to. So the last two songs I listened to Chainbreaker, and I read Chain of Iron, which is the second book in the Last Hours series by Cassandra Clare. Then the other song I listened to, it was actually a compilation of a bunch of different acoustic music, and it had the word music in the title, so I read Soul Music, which is the 16th book in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. Next up, I had to read a book for Alchemy, and it was for an O, and that was Stone to Copper. Read the first book in a series, and for that I read Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, which is the first book in the Empire of the Wolf series. Next up was Restoration, and she needed a Q in this one, so for her O prompt, she read Induce Sleep, Start a Book Before Bed, and read A Prison in a Dungeon Deep by Anne Bronte, which was a really short poem, but beautiful and haunting. And then for Q, Relocating Pain, read a book in a different spot each time, and for that, made it really easy on herself and read Theater of Cruelty by Terry Pratchett, which is like 4 pages long, and so was able to read it in one sitting. And then for Feywild Cartographer, so and that finished up Master of Elements. So Feywild Cartography, she did have to get an O in Demonology, and for that it was Intro to Low-Level Demons, read the first book Seen on Socials. So I scrolled through Goodreads and I landed on Artificial Conditions by Martha Wells, which is the second book in the Murderbot Diaries, and I did read that, and that one was really good. And then a Q in Inscription, and an O is a Glyph Tidy, book from your end of year TBR, and for that she read Middle Game by Shauna McGuire. And then this last book is the one that she had to get an extension on, and that was the Q prompt, and Words and Shields, shield on the cover or in the title. And for that she read Shield Maiden, Under the Howling Moon, and that is by Melanie Karsak. This was a great book. This was an under the radar surprise for me. I've had this one on my Kindle for a little while, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. At the end of the book, there's a website that you can go to get the prequel, and I've already got that downloaded, ready to go, and I can't wait to get started on it and to find the second book and finish out the series, because it's really fun. Based on Norse mythology. So good. Such a fun book. All right, so that was Ariel, and so she finished both her Master of Elements on time and the Feywild Cartography just a little bit late, but she still made it. Okay, next up was Karasu, and he was going for Godseer as well as trying to be a scribe. So let's see what he had to read and if he actually made it or not. So spoiler, he did. He actually did have to take one tiny little extension, and that was through September 3rd, but he did complete that. And that was one of the scribe prompts. Although if I had rearranged the books a little bit, I could have just used the book from Feywild Cartography for Ariel for that, and just added her extension on there, but it does matter either way. For the first prompt, again, for scribe, elemental studies, almost every course required elemental studies. And again, that was Element of Earth in the title. And I read The Last House on Earth by Robert Marcus Jr. and Ryan Marcus. And that was really interesting. It's kind of like a time travel, sci-fi, alternate reality-ish kind of thing with aliens, and very interesting. I'm glad I read it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting and thought-provoking. And then for both courses, needed to take inscription. So for Godseer, only needed an O, so one class. But for Scribe, Karasu had to get a D, so I had to do 3 different prompts for inscription. So for the O, which was a book from your end of year TBR, he read Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, which is the second book in the Brown Sisters series, and that was super fun, a good palate cleanser, and just a fun rom-com. And then for Scribe, he read Daughter of Witches by Patricia C. Weird, and that's the second book in the Lyra novels. And I was really sad. So when I first went to go download this book from my library, they said it was no longer available. I'm like, what? No, but you had it. Why is it not available? And this was from Hoopla, so I mean, it's like always available. It's not like you have to put it on hold or anything like that. And I was like, no. So like, what am I going to have to read instead? I'm going to have to pick out a new book. And so I waited a week and I went back and they had it. So I was very happy I did get to read this. It was very interesting. So there was a thing at the beginning of the book that talked about, from the author, that talked about the first 3 books in the series. And actually the first book and the second book have none of the same characters at all. So they're both kind of standalones, and it sounds like the first 3 books are somewhat standalones, but they're all set in the same world, so you know the world itself. And they have some mentions to some of the things that happened in the first book, but you don't necessarily need to have read the first book to have read this one. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good. I don't have to reread the first book at all to know what's going on in this one, because I read it so long ago. I've read it 2-3 years ago. But yes, it was really good. I enjoyed it. And then for Q, words and shields. Shield on the cover or in the title. And for that, I read Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell, and that is the first book in the Greatcoat series, and I loved that book. It has just enough fun and some humor, some snarky humor, which I really enjoy. And it has some action, and there's actually a good story and a plot. So I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I gave it 5 stars, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series. So big thanks to JD Ray Reads for her recommendation on this book. And then for D, Advanced Penmanship, not a debut. And for that I read, here it is again, Men at Arms, the 15th book in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. Okay, next up is Restoration, and Karasu had to read this for both of his courses. And for Scribe, he only had to read 1 book, but for Godseer, he had to read 2. So for the first prompt was Induce Sleep, Start a Book Before Bed, and he read Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, and A Dream Within a Dream by Edgar Allan Poe, which, oh, that's hauntingly beautiful. I loved that poem. And then for the second prompt was Relocating Pain, read a book in a different location each time, and for that I read Mental Fitness, and that is by Paul Wood. So I read it while I was sitting at my desk, I read it in my chair, I read it on the couch. It was an audiobook, so I was listening to it. I also listened to it while I was in the car, and while I was in the kitchen, I was in the bathroom cleaning, and I read it while I was all over the house. So that was great, and very good book. Very good. 5-star. Again, I think it's got actionable steps in there. It's very easy to read, and now I want to actually purchase the book either in physical or ebook form, just so I can read it again, and especially just have some of those action steps and stuff that were at the back, because just with the audiobook it's not as easy to go back and forth, and since it was a borrow from my library, I don't still have it. it's definitely worth the purchase on that one. Next up was Conjuration, and the O prompt is Ghostly Etiquette, a court or royal book, and for that I read Restless Slumber, the second book in the Fortuna Sworn series by KJ Sutton. This is another series where I actually liked the second book more than the first book that I read this month, which is kind of interesting. Restless Slumber was a little bit darker, I feel, than the first book was. And then for the second prompt, Q, was Spirit Communications, a book inspired or set in a different culture or country than yours. The Way of Eden by Philip Chase, which is the first book in the Eden series. And I loved this book. It is really interesting. It is a great high epic fantasy. It's a new favorite of mine, and I can't wait to tell you a little bit more about it in my August wrap-up. Next up is Demonology, and for that I had to read the first book seen on socials again, and so that was Saga Volume 4 by Brian K. Vaughan, and I actually really liked this one too. It's another book with some trigger warnings, so be aware of those before you start reading it. The whole series has some trigger warnings, so just check those out before you start the series, but I think it's worth the read. I think it was done really well, the artwork was great, and the storyline is so interesting. All right, and then the last class for both courses was Lore. So for Scribe, he had to get a Q, and for God's Ear, he had to get a D, so he had to read 5 prompts total, or 5 books total for the 3 prompts. So the first one is Tale of the Guide, Bookseller's Recommendation, and so I took Hardback Hoarder's recommendation of The Witches of New York by Amy McKay. I loved that book. Such a good read. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And also a recommendation from Darian at Darian Reads, and that is Heartstopper Volume 1 by Alice Oseman, and that was just so heartwarming and sweet. Such a sweet book. I have not yet watched the TV series, but I did thoroughly enjoy the comic. Next up is Cursed Cloaks, Clothing on the Cover, and for that he read Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson and Hood the Lieutenant by Nicole Adrianne. Both of those were really good. So Hood the Lieutenant is a short novella that I thought was like a Red Riding Hood retelling, which it sort of is. It's actually a twist on a Robin Hood and a Red Riding Hood retelling, and kind of meshes the two together, and it was so interesting. I didn't want to put it down. It was so easy to read, and the story was interesting, and it was fun. And again, check out my August wrap-up to find out more of my thoughts on that book. All right, and that was it for my readathons. There's a lot of books, but they were all enjoyable. I didn't feel like I was slumping or having to slog through any of the books, which was great. There were some I liked more than others, but that's gonna happen regardless of how many books you're reading, and I can't believe I got through as many as I did. I luckily had a lot of time to be able to listen to audiobooks while I was doing other things like my bookshelves, and I finished the chair portion of my Adirondack chairs. I'll have to put a picture here so you can see how it turned out. Kind of, it has a before and after, because there's still another chair and footstool I have to do and a side table, but we'll see. It might be October before I get to those. We'll see. But what I would like to know is, did you participate in the Magical Readathon or the Camp Counselor Readathon? How about the final book support group or the Full Moon Readathon? Did you participate in any of those? And if not, what Readathon did you participate in? I'd love to find out. Let me know down in the comments. And please like, comment, and subscribe if you wanna, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any videos from me. So leave a star or a wand emoji down in the comments to let me know that you are here, and in honor of G at Book Roast for her amazing Magical Readathon and the wonderful creativeness that she holds in her brain and shares with all of us. And I thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, keep reading.